Jack Thompson is an attorney and video game expert.
Attorney and conservative activist Jack Thompson is here.
Attorney Jack Thompson.
Jack Thompson.
Jack Thompson.
Jack Thompson.
Well, I've said that Grand Theft Auto is the worst assault on children since polio. Jack Thompson, attorney, video game industry's worst nightmare.
By the mid-90s, Jack Thompson had already made it his life's mission to fight obscene media. And though he had little success against radio hosts, hip-hop music, and rival politicians, he was tenacious with his beliefs.
The only problem with Jack Thompson is he's a Christian concerned about women and children.
Even though Jack clung tightly to his Christian identity, his actions showed otherwise. He was almost disbarred over his professional misconduct with another attorney, but he got off with a slap on the wrist. Then, he attacked the constitutionality of the Florida bar in 1993 because he believed it infringed on his religious freedoms. Of course, the Florida bar still exists, and Jack Thompson is no longer a lawyer. The story of how Jack was disbarred comes down to him finally picking a fight which became impossible to win, going up against the video game industry, and most mistakenly, its loyal fan base.
Let's go now to Jack Thompson. He's the attorney. This goes back a bit. He represented the families of the girls shot at a different school. Remember the one at Paducah, Kentucky back in '97? Well, Mr. Thompson is a strong opponent of violent computer games.
The Monday following Thanksgiving 1997, 14-year-old Michael Carneal shot 8 rounds at a group of peers praying outside his high school, killing 3 of them. Michael couldn't explain why he did it aside from feeling bullied, but Jack had a different motive in mind.
The world-renowned forensic pediatric psychiatrist testified at Carneal's criminal trial that but for the influence of that movie, his training literally on the game Doom, very violent first-person shooter video game, he would not have killed.
Jack built a case around the perpetrator being addicted to violent video games and pornography. He filed a 1999 lawsuit against who he thought was responsible. A combination of adult websites, video game developers, and the producers of The Basketball Diaries, a movie Michael was reportedly a fan of. Then, Jack argued the games Doom, Quake, and Mortal Kombat trained Michael to be an effective killer. The New York Times reported that the family sought upwards of $130 million in damages from the entertainment industry, with Jack leading the charge. Some of the other victims' parents felt this lawsuit was needlessly prolonging the trial and their suffering. It was around this time that Jack went on TV to warn that a similar shooting would happen, also caused by video games.
We went on NBC a week before Columbine. Matt Lauer asked me, what do you fear based upon what you learned in Paducah? And I said, we fear that there are going to be more of these by kids trained on the same game. Klebold and Harris trained on the game Doom.
Ultimately, prosecutors in the Michael Carneal case couldn't find a reasonable link of causality between games and real life, concluding that bullying, along with mental illness, were the motives for the attack. But by the time this case was dismissed in 2002, Jack had found the newest franchise to blame all of society's ills on: Grand Theft Auto. Ohio, 2003. A 15-year-old runaway named Dustin Lynch was staying with the family of Jolene Mishna when he brutally murdered the girl in her sleep. Dustin was described as an angry, antisocial teenager without a true motive, and he continued torturing the family with blood-stained confessions from jail. But the Mishna family remembered that Dustin had been glued to the TV while staying with them, obsessed with the game Grand Theft Auto 3. Jack Thompson's aunt, who still lived in Ohio, read the case in the newspaper. She told her nephew of the reference to GTA 3, prompting Jack to rush home to find out more. Jack got in touch with the Mishna family to help establish motive for Dustin's crime, and Jack ran with the video game conclusion. A source close to the family told Jack that Dustin was most fond of the baseball bat weapon, and Jack immediately concluded that knives and bats in the game prompted the stabbing and beating. There was one problem though. There are no knives available to use in GTA 3, no matter how much Jack insisted the game had them. Because Jack wasn't licensed to practice law in Ohio, he needed the court's permission to represent Lynch as a client, and planned on presenting the boy as a Manchurian candidate brainwashed by video games. Given that Jack was already speaking to the Mishna family, though, the county prosecutor argued this was a conflict of interest. Jack responded by saying the prosecutor didn't have the nerve to face a lawyer of his skill. When the judge hesitated, Jack demanded he be removed from the case. But despite this turnaround, Dustin Lynch refused to accept Jack's counsel. In the end, video games were not considered the motive for Dustin's crimes. In his own words, quote, "I killed Jolene Mishna for my own personal satisfaction, not because of a video game." It should be noted that Dustin Lynch admitted he was more influenced by James Patterson novels for inspiration than GTA 3, yet this wasn't given the same attention in the media. Dustin was convicted of first-degree murder, escaping the death penalty, but still getting life behind bars. This didn't placate Jack Thompson, who convinced Jolynn's father to pursue a civil suit against the games industry. At the same time, Jack was on the hunt for similar cases which may involve GTA 3. He started a website called StopKill.com where he castigated Take-Two Interactive, the publishers of Grand Theft Auto. Jack stumbled upon a murder trial in Tennessee where two stepbrothers randomly shot and killed a tractor-trailer driver while saying they got the idea from GTA 3. This seemed like such a fish-in-the-barrel case that Jack added Take-Two, Walmart, and Sony Computer Entertainment America to the lawsuit. Jack urged Walmart, who had sold the stepbrothers the game, to take it off their shelves to avoid further trouble. Take-Two vowed to challenge this, arguing they weren't at fault for the reckless actions of two teenagers. Legal experts doubted there would be progress without proof of intent on the developers' part to lead the youth to murder, but Jack believed that being a case of copycat violence was enough. Eventually, this case was quietly withdrawn after being moved to a lower court. In the midst of this, Jack took time out of his busy schedule to return to his roots and go after shock jocks on the radio. This time, none other than Howard Stern. Jack once called him, quote, the most visible pornographer in America. By 2004, he had filed several complaints about the Howard Stern Show to the FCC, and since the show was still on FM radio, they fined it continuously. Jack was able to have Howard Stern taken off at least 6 stations in Florida, which gave him the boost he needed to continue his war on video games. In 2005, Jack was granted a provisional license to practice law in Alabama so he could take on another case involving Grand Theft Auto.
Jack Thompson is a Miami attorney who knows just how influential Grand Theft Auto can actually be. Jack, let me start with you. Tell me what happened in Alabama in 2003.
In Alabama in June 2003, Devin Moore, having bought Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City with no parent in sight at stores, played it obsessively 10, 12, sometimes 16 hours a day. I've talked with Devin Moore on death row in the Atmore facility in Alabama. And there's no doubt in my mind, nor was there any doubt in the mind of Ed Bradley on 60 Minutes, who broadcast this story, that but for Devin Moore's training on this cop-killing simulator, he would not have been able to kill 3 cops in Fayette, Alabama, who are now dead and in the ground. We are suing Take-Two, Sony, Walmart, and GameStop for having trained Devin Moore to kill. He had no history of violence, no criminal record.
Okay, a lot of people, Jack, will say that, you know what, okay, so there's one kid that went bad.
Oh, no. There have been dozens. We could fill up the next 30 minutes talking about school shootings linked to Grand Theft Auto Vice City.
Jack represented the families of the victims, and once again turned the case into a media circus with another lofty lawsuit against the gaming industry. His case hinged on the fact that the murder reportedly said, quote, life is like a video game. You've gotta die sometime.
The video game industry gave him a cranial menu that popped up in the blink of an eye in that police station, and that menu offered him the split-second decision to kill the officers, shoot them in the head, flee in a police car, just as the game itself trained him to do.
Jack's worst instincts got a hold of him yet again, and he reportedly sent the defense attorneys a barrage of threatening letters and emails. He also apparently dodged his disciplinary history in Florida to the judge when applying to work on the case. For his conduct, Jack's temporary Alabama bar admission was revoked, and the judge had this to say, quote, Mr. Thompson felt compelled to smear opposing counsel, other attorneys with no involvement in this case, and individuals. Mr. Thompson's conduct towards opposing counsel has demonstrated a repeated inability to conduct himself with the required professional courtesy and civility. Even with this embarrassing setback, Jack Thompson was too scrappy to give up his campaign against video games. He had recently become aware of the hot coffee mod for Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. In short, this was a sex simulator programmed into the game that went completely unused. But because the assets for this minigame were left on the disc, computer programmers were able to patch it onto the PC version of the game, and later the versions on console. The controversy blew up in the media, with Senator Hillary Clinton calling for an investigation. The mounting pressure caused the Electronic Software Rating Board to revise its methods, with GTA San Andreas now falling under the adults-only rating. This curtailed the availability of the game to minors under the law. For Jack, this represented an important victory in the fight against lewd games. Then, this fight took an unforeseen turn. Jack's ability to find a spot on any news program covering video game violence brought him another round of national infamy.
Thompson once videotaped his 10-year-old son buying them in an effort to sting a major retailer. His activism also includes relentless lawsuits, lobbying, and protests. And when it comes to the company behind some of the most mature titles, he is hardly coy.
I'm out to shut down Rockstar because because they're run by a bunch of sociopaths, and they're a one-company crime wave.
One of his most absurd campaigns, against The Sims 2, made him the target of ridicule across the internet. Even though this game is basically a daily life simulator, Jack charged that its teen rating wasn't fitting. His reasoning was the presence of cheat codes in the game that disabled the blur function when characters are nude. But critics, including its developers, said this was nonsense. The character models had no more anatomical detail than Barbie dolls. Nothing came of this, except a lot of wasted time on Jack's part. A user of the GTA forums named Ill Spirit took credit for informing Jack about the Sims 2 mod, sending him on a wild goose chase for laughs. Jack now had the attention of a group that might not have grown up knowing about his early crusades: gamers. Though the video game's kerfuffle is how most gamers learnt of Jack Thompson, it was his comedically unprofessional conduct as a lawyer which gave him the most notoriety. Jack seemed unhappy with some of this attention, occasionally snapping back at the gamers who mocked him. One self-described group of concerned individuals opened the website jackthompson.org, cataloging his run-ins with gamers. Archived are a number of emails from Jack, like this one. Quote, "You gamers are all in a panic, which is why you are coming after me. If I were the lunatic you claim, you would ignore me. You are afraid because you know that I am right." Jack would often brush off emails from hecklers, but sometimes he'd write back angry responses, or suggest they take their own lives. In response, Jack sometimes received childish death threats riddled with profanity. He'd then forward these to US senators, urging them to open an FBI investigation. It doesn't seem Jack understood how, on the internet, this was simply throwing fuel on the fire. Once spectators saw how easy it was to egg him on, Jack's attention was split between activism and dealing with his detested audience. He went after Rockstar's other games, like Manhunt and Bully, using his same old arguments about it triggering youth to be violent. But with Bully, Jack's other prejudices were once again on full display. He complained that the male character could kiss other boys, just as he could girls. Though he was confident that pointing this out would surely make the ESRB change its teen rating, they later told Jack they already knew about it when they assessed the game. Another game Jack unsurprisingly took issue with was Mortal Kombat. He somehow learnt that the latest game had a character who resembled him.
Who uses what sort of fighting style?
It's called legalese. I kick away at people in my Brooks Brothers suit.
Jack sent the developers a cease and desist demanding its removal. But it turns out this was the product of the website Gaming Target, who made the character to show off the game's custom fighter tool. When Jack found out, he sent the webmasters an email which simply read, quote, "You've got to be kidding me, right?" With litigation against the gaming industry constantly in limbo, Jack tried an unconventional approach to get through to them. Here, Jack announced he'd donate $10,000 to charity, conditional on a development team creating a very specific type of video game in 2006. This game would include the following: a plotline where a grieving father takes revenge on the world following the death of his son at the hands of a gamer. There would be many weapons, especially baseball bats. The father would go on a killing spree of those presumed to be Jack's own enemies: lawyers defending violent games, arcade patrons, store clerks, and culminating at E3, all gaming company executives. Although no company took him up on his offer, it turned out a group of hackers had already modded GTA San Andreas into a game called Defamation of Character, a Jack Thompson murder simulator. Amazingly, it even had a similar storyline. But Jack derided this effort as amateur, and he thought the reason a real studio didn't try was fear. He insisted he wasn't about to, quote, deny a donation to some starving kids in Africa or the like over a technicality, but also says he never received what he considered a legitimate offer. One of Jack's biggest online followings, the Penny Arcade website, caught wind of the modest proposal. The two were already acquainted. The website store sold "I Hate Jack Thompson" shirts, and Jack once blamed them for a defamatory leaflet campaign in his neighborhood. As Jack hadn't yet made his promised donation, Penny Arcade took it upon themselves to give $10,000 to a children's game charity in his name. Jack was infuriated and pursued legal action against them. First, he filed complaints with the Seattle police. But all this attention drove more people to the Penny Arcade website, and more than ever, Jack was the recipient of an enormous amount of hate mail. Labeling his detractors, quote, computer geeks, Jack revealed that some of them had filed numerous complaints to the Florida bar, who was now investigating. He tried filing a harassment lawsuit against Penny Arcade in federal court, arguing they were trying to stifle his freedom of speech through, quote, terroristic tactics. But in what was becoming a trend, Jack's efforts were, again, unsuccessful. Jack continued feeding the trolls through the mid-2000s, often threatening them with lawsuits through email when he grew fed up. In a heated exchange with the website VGCats, Jack accused all gamers of being on drugs. The rush to catalog all of Jack's escapades led to an unusually detailed Wikipedia article by 2005 standards. This alone should show just how much of a spotlight was on the attorney at this point. Though some gamers took care to source every bit of information to ensure it would stay up, many simply enjoyed vandalizing the page. Jack threatened Wikipedia with a libel lawsuit, urging the site to release the full contact details of these anonymous contributors. And of course, these were hollow threats that, again, went nowhere. Not about to have his good name besmirched, though, Jack began making his own unsolicited edits to the page. This simply resulted in Jack's account being banned and his Wikipedia article locked, making it harder for him to challenge that what was written and cited. It was now becoming a running joke that Jack would sue anyone he insulted if they dared strike back. But the laughter stopped when Jack pulled one of his most abhorrent stunts to date. In early 2006, a popular member of the Metal Gear Solid forums named Mitch Stukerjürgen took his own life after overdosing on sleeping pills during a live stream. Though there was an outpour of support online for his grieving friends and family, for some reason Jack felt this tragedy was an appropriate time to reiterate that gamers were going to hell. He then blamed Mitch's online friends for being too stupid to dial 911 while the stream was going on. The response to these insensitive comments was overwhelmingly negative. But even in light of this, some wished Jack well and hoped he would overcome his unforgiving rhetoric. Nevertheless, there were some who continued getting a kick out of antagonizing Jack, knowing full well he'd respond in kind. One creative mind believed that although funny, this was entirely proving Jack's point about gamers. He proposed a different method of outreach, dubbed Flowers for Jack, which he explains as follows. Quote, "My point is simple. Gamers everywhere write him hate mail, send him threats, call him at all hours of the night. This is not constructive, damn it! This only makes us into what he says we are. We are to the point that he will disregard any correspondence at the very least, threaten it legally at the most. It's hard to get his attention for real. I propose we write him a stern, dignified letter, free of insults, exaggerations, or unfounded complaints, and state the most honest and reasonable case we can. More importantly, it will be sent with as many bouquets of beautiful pink roses as it can possibly send to his office. Not threats, not pizzas that he didn't order. Pretty flowers, paid for by gamers with no insulting words attached. It's goddamn ridiculous. That's what makes it perfect. He's proven to have a sense of humor sometimes. Let's see if he can take a jab that isn't so hateful, that represents the casual gamer, the sarcastic, fun-loving nerds we are." Money was indeed raised and a mountain of flowers found their way to Jack, along with a letter of apology on behalf of all gamers. Unfortunately, he didn't quite appreciate this. Jack initially blamed Take-Two for this delivery from the gamers, sending them the flowers and warning them that one day God would seek retribution for their sins. Jack would remain a stalwart enemy of the gaming industry for a while yet, but now his media appearances were attracting criticism from more than just gamers. Now every time he spoke on a television panel, it only seemed to further hurt any credibility he may have maintained in the past. Jack tried getting the sale of games like GTA San Andreas restricted in Louisiana, and although his case seemed promising, it wound up unsuccessful. Though his legal position was precarious, networks still thought he was worth bringing on to talk about violence related to video games. This came to a head in what's probably the most infamous interview of Jack's, conducted mere hours after one of America's most shocking tragedies.
Tell me, based on your experience, what some of the initial questions have to be on the part of these parents of these students.
Well, there are a lot of factors. Typically, the school shooters train literally on video games to do this. Dawson College last year, Montreal, the shooter, the killer, trained on a game called Super Columbine Massacre. Also Postal 2, both of which are murder simulation games in which the school shooters can rehearse and plan for and make themselves more efficient in these kind of murderous rampages.
The question of training and efficiency is something quite different than these shooters having something very wrong with them. I mean, it's one thing to experiment with a video game and something else to actually do it.
And what's very troubling is that, of course, in this country for 300 years you had kids going to school with guns to shoot their dinner for their families, and they weren't turning their guns on one another. So what we have is a nation literally of potential Manchurian candidate children in schools, having spent hundreds of hours each year on mass murder machines that teach them that it's glamorous, it's fun to kill human beings, and also how to kill them. You saw a methodology here of chaining the doors, then going calmly. Apparently, this is according to eyewitnesses, there was a flat effect on his face, just as if you were playing a video game. And coolly, calmly killing people very efficiently. If you and I were to enter into that situation for the first time, our heart rate would be over 100. We probably couldn't get the magazines into the guns. But when you rehearse these things ahead of time, you're more able to do it.
All right, Jack Thompson, an attorney who specializes terribly in these crimes.
Jack's comments on the Virginia Tech shooter were wholly inaccurate. The identity was not yet released at the time of that interview, so Jack would have nothing other than his own suspicions to go on. It turned out the shooter hadn't played Counter-Strike consistently in 4 years, although Jack speculated this is how he practiced. Despite piles of evidence coming out to the contrary, Jack maintained his position and argued against the facts. When it turned out the shooter had been more of a fan of games like Sonic the Hedgehog, Jack quietly dropped the issue, but the damage to his authority was done. If Jack appeared rattled around this period, there was certainly good cause. In February 2007, the Florida bar opened disbarment proceedings against Jack for his routinely shameful conduct. He was sending letters left, right, and center to all levels of government, now openly speculating there was a conspiracy against him. Dozens of complaints had already been filed by gamers and fellow lawyers alike, alleging Jack tried harassment, intimidation, and humiliation against his enemies even after cases were closed. Indeed, he often accused judges who didn't rule in his favor of being bribed or otherwise corrupt, and of course, this seldom helped his cause. Jack clearly couldn't admit that it might have been him who was in the wrong, as he continued to push to have certain games banned to minors. Once again targeting the products of Take-Two, they finally had had enough and intended to shut him up for good. Jack had already bought shares in the company and wanted to speak at a shareholder meeting to try and sway others against the direction the company was taking. But before he got a chance, and in a move few saw coming, the publisher filed a lawsuit against Jack for his constant attacks on their First Amendment rights. Even with his legal career already in jeopardy, Jack welcomed the challenge from Take-Two. For him, this would be the ultimate showdown. He filed a countersuit in which he accused the company of engaging in racketeering. Jack also named a slew of past critics who were supposedly working with them, including Penny Arcade, GameSpot, and Joystick. Basically, he thought any institutions protesting his increasingly wild actions were in cahoots with one another to get rid of him. Amazingly, the two parties agreed to settle for terms one might not have expected Jack to abide. He agreed on no further lawsuits against Take-Two, and to essentially stop bashing its products. In turn, they would desist from any further actions to see Jack punished under the bar. Though Jack would denounce Take-Two's games once again on television just a few years later, this ordeal had effectively neutered him as a threat to the company. Jack had other worries in 2008, however. The disbarment proceedings were running along smoothly, with sanctions considered for Jack that February. These sanctions would force him to find another lawyer to sign off on any future filings he made with the Florida bar, which to that point they described as, quote, frivolous and insulting. One of Jack's more recent attempts involved submitting gay pornography to the court as part of an attack on a homosexual lawyer he believed was conspiring with the bar to have his license revoked. Jack defended his filing on account of, quote, the court's inability to comprehend his case. According to documents from the Florida Supreme Court, Jack's petitions against the sanctions were coming in daily. These reiterated his belief that the court was looking for revenge after he embarrassed them, though the court's response labeled them, quote, rambling, argumentative, and contemptuous. Jack was subsequently hit with the sanctions. Though these alone severely hindered his legal crusades, the decisive blow that finished Jack's career was still coming. That May, a Florida bar referee finally finished going through thousands of pages and transcripts related to Jack Thompson. Her recommendations were 5 pages long, detailing 27 charges against him. These were a compilation of Jack's least professional actions, including his attacks on other judges and the times he was untruthful before tribunals. Jack complained that there wasn't enough detail for him to make a fair rebuttal, which went ignored. His tried-and-true tactic of suing the bar also got him nowhere. Rather, the Florida bar recommended in June that Jack receive an enhanced disbarment, which would forbid him from reapplying to the bar for a full decade. Not only was his conduct cited, but more importantly his stubborn refusal to admit to mistakes. At his hearing, the judge shot down his attempt to soapbox about how unfairly he had been treated, but he did get a word in towards the end. Quote, "I have put up with your serial breaches of Florida laws, of the canons of judicial conduct, and of the Constitution and of common decency for a year and a half now. When this is done, and when you recommend my disbarment, and when the Supreme Court does disbar me, the tables will be turned. It will then be my time at bat, and a jury of normal people in this county will undo all that you have done." Jack was hit with a fine to the tune of over $43,000, and now faced permanent disbarment for his obstinance. The judge stated that Jack was unlikely to ever give up while he had some ability to practice law. Florida's Supreme Court agreed with this, and so on September 25, 2008, the move to disbar Jack Thompson was complete. Never one to go down without a fight, Jack tried getting an emergency stay on the decision, but this was denied. Almost a year after that fateful day, Jack announced he was planning to return to law. Declaring his disbarment insignificant on account of an unfair trial, he taunted the Florida bar to challenge this. But little came out over the next few years about Jack. He believes his protesting the presence of the Taliban in a Medal of Honor game resulted in the developers changing it, but they never confirmed it was Jack who persuaded them. Jack had a simple message for the gamers shocked at his return. Quote, "I win again as usual. Any gamers who don't think so and who don't appreciate what I do to protect our culture can go to hell. Any gamers who don't know how to get to hell on an expedited basis, let me know, and I'll send along the cheat code to get there more quickly." Evidently, his old habits would die hard. Jack closed out the decade with a $40 million lawsuit against Facebook because of inflammatory comments he read about himself. He says he faxed the messages to Mark Zuckerberg twice to demand their removal, but never heard back. The lawsuit didn't have legs, and by the end of the new year, Jack Thompson was fading into obscurity. One of Jack's talents was always finding a platform, and as his reputation soiled, he became less choosy with where he appeared. He even showed up on game developer Jace Hall's web series, where we get more insight into Jack's bizarre sense of humor.
Having created mature-rated video games myself, and just listening to you, and effectively I'm one of the damned, apparently.
Permanently.
We'll just say that I disagree, but let's just say that I wanted to...
Don't disagree or it'll be even hotter down there for you.
This video game store is just like a big house of porn to you? Is that what this is?
It's more like a crack den and whorehouse.
Jack was also on Penn and Teller, giving a rare glimpse into his home life.
I think common sense tells us that the last thing you want to be doing is putting into the hands of sociopathic kids, in effect, training videos on how to do what they might be, let's say, predisposed to do.
The Miami New Times reported in 2011 that Jack had joined the Reformed Theological Seminary's online campus, though he hasn't spoken of this much since. He was brought onto a Huffington Post panel in 2013 to protest the release of Grand Theft Auto 5, but clearly this didn't have the same bite he may have once enjoyed. More recently, he spoke to Inverse in 2016 about his tumultuous career. Though he lamented his own shortcomings in seeing any real change, he was confident that his fight was like that against the tobacco industry. Clearly he still believed in his cause, but he noted it would take a Saul Goodman type to get anywhere. Jack opened up that getting disbarred left him depressed for 3 years, but he found new direction as a volunteer teaching prison inmates civics and basic law. Jack says the administration told him, quote, "This cannot be civics according to Jack Thompson. It's got to be right down the middle with none of your right-wing garbage." Jack is apparently quite happy to comply. As we've seen, Jack Thompson's story is pretty complicated. This is entirely because of his volatile personality, combined with his zeal to fight a losing battle over the morals of society. Today's anomaly isn't so much about whether Jack was right or wrong, but the approach he took in expressing his beliefs. There's no doubt he's made more enemies than necessary with his open bigotry and countless goads for people to kill themselves. And yet, Jack has an unusual self-awareness that his extreme tactics are often rooted in anger and prejudice. Amazingly, we've only covered the most infamous times in Jack's career. There are many more larger-than-life moments with Jack, like the time he accused Al-Qaeda of using bioweapons on Disney cruise ships. Even as recently as 2018, he's tried getting back into offering legal counsel with his usual link between games and violence, but his offers are seldom taken seriously. Whether Jack will ever make peace with his hatred of violent video games and his perceptions about society remains unclear, but we can still hope his perspective will evolve as he continues finding a new direction with educating inmates.
Wow, it's pretty cool.
If you haven't heard about Jack's beginnings in the 1990s, feel free to watch our previous video, The Rise of Jack Thompson, for more about his colorful career.